All right, without further ado, we'll get things going here. Welcome all to our first educational public safety webinar in our series. My name is Grant Hosko with DJI, and thank you all for taking some time to join today. Before we hop into the webinar, a few quick notes. You'll all be sent the recording after the fact, so you have that as well as a quick survey to provide any feedback to us all that you may have. If you'd like to ask questions throughout, you can use the questions tab and we'll get to those as possible and follow up via email if there's ones we're not able to get to. We're fortunate today to be joined by John Beal and Kyle Williams, both from the Law Enforcement Drone Association. On the manufacturer side, it's really exciting to see an organization with a focus on training, education, and really expanding the use of UAS in policing. They are the president and vice president respectively. I'll let them kind of dive into that more in depth, but just in my personal experience, their wealth of operational knowledge really helps out when talking with other departments and sharing some of their lessons learned and success stories. So we'll pass it over to John, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. So I'm going to share my screen here if I can. I'm not seeing that link here. Grant, are you able to make that organizer again? And let's see what happened here. Change presenter. Sorry for that delay. There we go. I see some stuff now. Okay. All right. So appreciate y'all being here. This is exciting for us to do. We've been partnered with DJI and a couple other webinars that we've done, as well as in the past with the Law Enforcement Drone Association. We'll kind of talk about what we do as an organization. I'll give you guys a little background on myself. I'm currently a police officer for 13 years. I started my police career with the Los Angeles Police Department back in 2008. I moved my family up to the Portland metro area back in 2013 and joined as a lateral the Gresham Police Department, where I worked as a field training officer and narcotics detective, and now I'm currently assigned as a police sergeant on patrol. And then I began, back when I was on the DOPE team, I began building our drone program back in about 2017. I started doing the research and development for that program. And from there, that kind of, it took a hold of me. And I say all the time that I'm kind of like a type A personality that moved into more, just kind of gawked and nerded over these drones and saw the potential for us to be able to use them in law enforcement. And that's how it kind of built our program in Gresham. So in 2019, I got the buy-off from my chief to be able to start the process of hiring or selecting members of our UAS team. And in April of 2020, we actually began our training and our deployments. So we have 10 pilots on my team. I've got 6 aircraft. They're all DJI aircraft at this time. And we train bi-monthly for 10 hours. And then we've got about 150 deployments, actually a little bit more than 150 deployments since we began last April. We're the most specialized, or the most utilized specialty unit on the department. We have our fingers in all the different cookie jars within the police department between investigations, SWAT, patrol, traffic. We get tapped out for all different kinds of stuff. So it's really neat to see something come from nothing to we're getting called all the time to be able to provide a service for the department. And then I was selected as the president of the Law Enforcement Drone Association back in January of 2020 when we began our work towards becoming an association that led from a working group. And since then, we've grown to have well over, I think we're like 215, 220 agencies nationally in the United States involved in what we're doing, as well as close to about 450 members on our member rolls. I'm gonna hand it over to Kyle. You wanna talk about your background, Kyle?
Yeah. So I've been a police officer for 17 years. I was a cadet for 5 years before that with Eugene. Was hired in 2004 and have stayed there the entire time. I've got a family history of law enforcement. My dad was a police officer in Eugene for 29 years. And my brother-in-law and I are all, my brother and I are both sergeants. My brother-in-law is a lieutenant with EPD. So we've been around for a bit. Over the years, I've held a handful of roles, from crisis negotiator to being on our field force team, a school resource officer for a few years, the professional standards sergeant doing policy accreditation, internal affairs, and now back to patrol. We don't allow beards, but I've been on family leave with a new baby at home, and so I'm growing this one since our new little guy was born. I was in that policy and accreditation position when things kind of kickstarted at our department for drones, and was tasked with writing a policy for our collisions team. But that really morphed into realizing that we needed to have better span of control over the drone scene at our department. And I had already been geeking out over it a little bit, like John, and so I started creating the idea of a department-wide independent team, seeing that pretty much every department within the police department, every specialty within the department could really use the drones for what they were doing. So we launched into about a 6-month process of getting our admin on board, vetted it through a police commission, did a 1-year pilot program where we were allowed to do basically crime scene mapping and photography. And then in 2019, we launched full bore into our team. We currently have 6 pilots, including myself, 10 DJI aircraft at this point. We train monthly, a single 10-hour training day monthly. And we have really ignited in our deployments. Last year we had 100 for the year, and this year we're already at 150-ish, 140 to 150 for the year so far. Like anything, and part of the presentation we'll talk about later a little bit, is just managing those expectations. We've had 150 deployments. We've probably had 20 to 25 where we materially added to the outcome, or we're able to confirm that somebody wasn't where we thought they might be. But it's been really good. So I was selected as the LEDA vice president back in January 2020 when we officially decided to form our group, and it's just been a ton of fun and grown really fast ever since.
Awesome. Let's see if I can get here. So we're going to move into doing an instant debrief. We talked about originally when we made this webinar possible that we were going to present an instant debrief, kind of talk about it and see how drones can be effective in law enforcement. And so I'll show a quick video. Hopefully you guys can hear it. If you can't hear it, let me know. Let's see here. Okay. So again, this is a Gresham incident. I was involved in this one. This is back in, I think it was November of last year, and we had a hit and run. It'll kind of play through it, and then I'll kind of talk about what we did as a UAS team, how we were able to utilize the technology in order to make a great capture and a good debrief video.
134. Oh, it's turning into an injury wreck, Powell and Birdsdale.
Copy.
4111. Go ahead. You need to step up the cars to Powell and Birdsdale. The driver's running westbound on Powell. Got some guy chasing him. Okay, cars stepping up to Powell and Birdsdale. 3 cars involved. The suspect was running, white male, teenager, no shirt, dark pants. He just dipped north between some houses. Get you an address here in a second.
Internal reporting come up from Milwaukee. Is that driver?
4111. I think the address is 2309 on Powell here. Okay, 2309 West Powell, possible address. He was last seen northbound.
214, are you guys seeing containment up on this guy?
319, I'm arriving at the crash. Okay, let's get some cars to the north, off northwest 5th and Birdsdale area.
134, let's start a perimeter. Let's go Powell to northwest 5th and Birdsdale over to Bryn Mawr.
Okay, next car northwest 5 and 11 mile over Birdsdale.
3190 to 124, you're clear to launch your Delta unit.
Copy, I'm head over to Bell Edge Park.
Okay, I'll meet you there. I'm going to break away from the spot here. Somebody can take my spot at 11 mile and 5.
124 Delta units up. Delta units up.
3109, just for 2104. We've got our eyes on a hot spot in the forested area. Looks like just south of Bryn Mawr. I'll try to see if I can walk you guys in once I get inside of you, but it looks like it's going to be of interest.
Okay. Dog's going to be out in a sec. Just clarifying for everyone. Teenager, shirtless, dark hair. Charges right now, felony hit and run.
Copy. Dog will be out in a second.
Yeah, 3109 to 2104. Looks like there's a dirt road or something that kind of runs north-south from the last location he was seen. And he's going to be off the dirt road, maybe 50 to 75 feet west of the dirt road. I can walk you in once he gets to that location there. Looks like that hotspot is moving. Just FYI.
Yeah, I gave an announcement over the PA, so we'll give him a chance to comply. If not, we'll start out. Can you update me on his movement?
Yeah, he's kind of moving around towards the west now, towards 11 Mile. Slowly kind of crawling through the brush there, looks like.
Okay, we're going to start the track.
3109 kind of looks like he bedded down a little farther. Maybe kind of burrowed his way down beneath some brush down there.
That's exactly copy. We're going to be heading down that trail that you guys were talking about that's on the west of the address we're at. It's 2309.
You can copy that. I have you on camera now. I'll let you know when you guys need to stop and break west. And 3109, if you guys break to the west now, 2104, he's in the brush in that area there, probably about 50 yards to your west.
169, we copy. Trying to see. There's like a trail that goes through. For that car on 4th, if you go south, more towards like 2nd or past 3rd, that'd probably be a good spot. Yeah, if that car can move to that mid-block space between 1st and 2nd, that's the most likely spot for breakthrough.
Looks like that's 155.
Or 154. 169, we're pushing west through the brush.
Copy, pushing west, 2101.
3109, you're probably about 20 yards shy, but you're on the right track.
Got it. 169, we're making secondary Q9 announcements. 169, no response to secondary announcements.
You're about 10 yards shy right now.
154, I cleared the last, and I'm at northwest 2nd and 11 Mile. Copy, 2 and 11 Mile.
169, we're challenging one.
Copy, challenge going non-emergency FDR, 2103.
Send a car up this road for a second person.
2104, say again, I didn't get that over the dog.
3109, they're going to need one more body. I think they've got one rolling up on the road right behind them.
Copy.
Do you have a house number behind?
I take the trail Bryn Lane on the west side of 2309, and I'm coming up with them to get one more to go see my car.
Looks like they're going 61 with them now.
Copy, 61, do you guys want the air still?
Yeah, just hold it momentarily.
Copy, 2104.
So that was an example of how we used our drone last November. Go back to sharing your screen. We'll kind of debrief that and talk to you guys about how we deployed, lessons we learned about that one. So stand by one here. Okay, so obviously we had a felony hit and run our laws in Oregon are pretty specific on how we're allowed to use drones. And one of the ways we're allowed to use drones is if a crime is about to occur, has occurred, or is occurring, and we have probable cause to believe that it has occurred, or those three criteria, and we don't have time to go write a warrant. So we call that an exigent circumstance. So we've got exigent circumstance, we don't have time to write a warrant, so we put up our drone and attempt to locate our suspect. And for that specific incident, we had a detective that just happened to be driving by the location, and this was kind of later at night too. Obviously, you could see during when we were going in that split screen mode, it was pitch black out there. So he happened to be driving by, see the crash happen, and saw the guy dip in the blocks. So he started putting that location. Our patrol unit started responding to that area, and at that time, we got to lock it down. And that's one of the biggest things that we need to do when we're looking to deploy a drone, is getting that scene locked down as quickly as possible. If we can get a good perimeter and a tight perimeter, then we can actually get containment. We can see, we can lock those corners down, and we'd be able to put up a drone and start searching. Obviously, like air support units know, sometimes these guys break out of perimeters, or they keep running and they just keep going. So it is what it is. But what we try to do is we want to lock down as quickly as we possibly can. So that's what happened. We called in our resources like K9 and UAS. And for us, unfortunately, with my department, I have to ask for lieutenant or above approval to launch our drones. We're trying to get that fixed and lowered. But at that point, I have to call a lieutenant or get approval for them to be able to deploy a drone. So I do that, and I tell my pilot, hey, go ahead and launch. You're good to go. He decides that he wants to launch from a park nearby, and we've trained our pilots not to launch from within the perimeter or right outside the perimeter. We want them to be a little bit of a ways away as a buffer for us, so that we're not walked up on, or bad guy doesn't come out and deal with us while we're trying to fly a drone looking for bad guy. Because I've had it happen before where I was looking for a burglary suspect, and it turns out he walks around the house right near where I was launching. So we learned the hard way from that one. Okay, we're not going to be flying the drone from nearby the perimeter. We're going to be a block or two away. Give us a little bit of space to be able to deploy and operate as an air crew. So I formed up with him. He was the pilot. We usually operate our drone. We have a Matrice 300, and we usually operate our drone like a two-man air crew. So we have one pilot in the aircraft, and we have one operating the camera, and then communicating with the resources on the ground. And that's what I did after that specific call. That's why you're hearing my voice on the radio. And so at that point, we launched the drone. We start looking towards that perimeter and start figuring out and isolating and investigating the heat sources that we're seeing with that thermal camera. One of the big things you're going to want to do, and when you're working at night and you're using thermal, is you're going to want to start isolating heat sources, start looking and seeing how they compare to maybe a human heat source. So you could turn the drone around towards you when you're at that distance and start looking at what does a human-sized heat source look like, and that kind of in essence calibrates your thermal camera. You can go further than that, and you can use your other resources like a light. If you have a spotlight on there, some people are using the Z15, or they're using the GL60 zoom spotlights, and those are really great resources to be able to investigate hot spots if it's the right time. I would tell you guys, if you're going to use the spotlight to start investigating the resources, have a contact team in place ready to go before you flip that spotlight on, or communicate with your search team before you do that, because you don't want to kick anything off unnecessarily too early before you're ready to actually handle that situation. So specifically on this one, I'm seeing these hot spots, and that's why you're seeing me flip back and forth between the regular thermal and then the split mode. And that's a really helpful tool with the Matrice 300, that you can split your screen. I can see on my left side what is thermal, and I can see on my right side what that looks like with a visible camera. So I can say, in that instance, I saw a heat source, I looked at it, you know what, that's a street light. Okay, we're gonna rule that one out, and we're gonna keep searching. I attempted to orient my map, and that's why you see me zooming into the map. Most of the time, if you're connected to internet or Wi-Fi, you have a hotspot, or a portable hotspot in your car, and you're connected to Wi-Fi, your addresses should populate over your structures. It'll be like a kind of a light gray numbering over that building structure, and you should be able to see what your addresses are. In that instance, they weren't populating, so I said, nope, I'm going to be out with that. I'll just kind of go based upon my streets, and that's what we had. So we had to deal with that. Our K9 team gets out to the scene. We locate, within 3 minutes, we actually located that hotspot in the forested area, so it was very fast. And I didn't even realize how heavily treed it was, but I'm really happy that the thermal worked out the way it did. So we identified a hotspot. Usually what we've trained to do is don't necessarily say, hey, I've got your suspect or I've got bad guy in this area, because we don't know that it's bad guy yet. So we can identify a hotspot, maybe it's a point of interest or a subject of interest, and we're going to tell our teams to use caution when they're investigating those things, because it could be a guy or it could be a pile of grass, or it could be electrical box or something like that. So don't necessarily just jump on the gun and I say suspect is here. You're going to say I've got a hot spot in this area and I can guide you in and walk you in when you're ready. We got additional resources in the perimeter. You heard in that one instance where they're asking for other resources or where they want to put more bodies, and the pilot just jumped on right away and said, hey, looking at the map, hey, this is where we got a hole. This is where the guy could break out if he decided running west. So we want to plug that hole. And at that point, until we had bad guy in custody, our UAS is going to operate kind of as that comm person, the communications person. So we're going to be broadcasting the updates to dispatch so that the K9 team doesn't necessarily have to do that. And they can worry about finding person, and we can worry about covering them with communications with visual or visually covering or clearing the area right around them, and then broadcasting updates and stuff. So, and you heard too, like at one point the dog was barking pretty loudly. The K9 handler was trying to broadcast, dispatch couldn't hear it. For some reason, I was able to hear it better than dispatch was, I guess, and I just put that out again. So just kind of rebroadcasting what's going on. And then, you know, the nice thing about having that camera overwatch is that I can see the resources coming in as that was happening. So I knew immediately that, hey, this is going to be, they need one more body. They got one driving up. I can see it right away. So that way they know they're covered. So that's kind of the incident debrief that we have there. If you guys have any questions about that incident, throw that in the question area. It was just kind of a quick down and dirty rundown of how effective these drones can be in law enforcement for us. And we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar today. So we'll move forward and we'll start talking about UAS programs and why LEDA was created. Kyle, you want to handle the LEDA aspect and why we're doing what we're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone over a little bit of this already. LEDA was formed in 2018, started as a working group. The chief pilot for Portland Police Bureau's Air Support Unit, Sergeant Josh Goldschmidt, who's now retired, had been pulling together names and contacts for folks in the greater Portland area who'd been working on kind of leaning towards the direction of putting together drone programs. And he was recognizing a need for folks to be able to communicate together and be working together on the process. That culminated in him sending out a group, let's finally actually get together and talk about drones. And we met up in actually Southern Washington. There were probably 18 or 20 of us from 6 or 7 different agencies. I was the furthest south in Eugene, with most folks being from Southern Washington and the Portland area. We spent several hours just roundtable talking about where we were with our programs. Everybody was super new to it. It was mostly individual officers from their agencies who were kind of trying to figure it out on their own, or were slowly implementing their own programs. I wouldn't even call them programs, just starting to fly drones for their agencies. And so we finally, I think we're all pretty thirsty for having some help and a community to be able to work with and help us figure out the Oregon laws, the FAA regulations. And so at the end of that meeting, we decided, well, let's start meeting quarterly and cultivate this and help each other out. So we did that for about 1.5 years. We put together a handful of what wound up being really good, helpful, informative quarterly meetings. And then we're like, well, heck, why don't we just put together a conference? I mean, we've got most of it all there anyway. And who doesn't like to go to Bend in the fall? So we had our first, yeah, it's beautiful there. So we had our first conference in September, October of 2019. It was totally free for everybody and completely shoestring, and yet came together and was just smooth and super, super helpful. So we had about 50 cops from 14 agencies with 2 different vendors. It was about 1/2 to 2/3 classroom material and then scenario exercises in the afternoons. It was a 3-day event. At the end of it, our steering committee met up and we realized that we were onto something here, that this was something that the police side needed. We needed to have an association that was just helping folks build, train, set standard, and get into this space. Most of our police specialties all have associations that are kind of what the industry leans on for expectations and standards. And so that's where LEDA was birthed. Came up with a name that was super simple and easy, unlike the Northwest Regional Unmanned Working Group. We had like 6 different versions of it that we slowly kicked through and then landed on LEDA at the end of it. So the board was the original steering committee that was created out of the initial group of folks. Being that we were at that time regional to our area, we selected folks that kind of encompassed the range of geographical locations that we're from. And so our board is spread out from Eugene all the way up to Clark County, and then the various agencies representing the various agencies that were involved at the time. And so we are all current or former law enforcement on the board, and just continue to grow and expand, continuing to try to offer good training, be there to help other agencies that are starting out. It can seem like an elephant when you get started trying to figure out how to manage things, and it's really not that bad. And we really enjoy being able to help break that down for folks and get drone programs going.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're excited to be able to come and talk with you guys today about presenting, or I guess building a solid UAS program for your agency in law enforcement. We specifically focus on law enforcement only. So if you're a fire guy or you're a search and rescue guy solely, these principles are going to be really based upon law enforcement. So if you do law enforcement, stuff, like you're not necessarily a law enforcement officer, but you assist in law enforcement, we welcome you also as well. But what we want to do is like kind of we did today, is we will actually go into detail and depth about doing incident debriefs and law enforcement sensitive information, which is why we keep our membership to either current or former sworn, or there might be some few exceptions in there. So if you have any questions about it, you can email. We'll give you our information at the end of the slides here. So building a program for your agency. One of the top things that we advocate for you guys to do is document stuff and write memorandums, write memos, write policies, and write procedures. It's really hard to get a solid foundation if you don't have that foundation written out or understood. So the idea for you guys would be to outline in a memo what you want your program to be, how you want it to look like, what your policies and procedures are, and that will protect you for the most part. If you have outlined policies and you train on those policies and you standardize your training, then those things are going to help you in the long run, especially in court. If you're asked about training, we had that come up back in March. We were asked about specific types of training. We had an officer involved shooting that was witnessed by our drone air crew. So those things all come into play, and you want to have that outlined. You want to have those procedures done. Standardize your training is important. You want to train everybody in your team the same way, if absolute possible. So everybody can do the same job. They can all switch out and do a different job within your air crew, but everyone's trained exactly the same way. Super important. Require a base set of skills is also important, because you want people to be able to hit a certain mark. If you've got guys or folks on your UAS team that are just not efficient or not productive with your guys' team, you're going to want to set that base level of standards, so that way they have to reach that level. And if they can't reach it, then at that point you're going to have a stern discussion, or you're going to have to figure something out on your team. Figure out what types of missions you're going to fly, whether that's going to be with SWAT, K9, traffic, patrol, search and rescue. Outline those things. Some agencies were saying, hey, you can have drones, but you can only use them for traffic. We don't want you using drones for anything else, but you need to figure out what that's going to be. Some other agencies may say you can do SWAT and traffic. I think right now that's kind of the vein of where Portland police are. They want that UAS program. They want it for everything, but they're kind of having that pushback. And we'll talk about some of that pushback in just a few minutes. But outline what you want to do with your team. Outline your budget. Also really, really important. When you're creating a unit, usually you don't have any money. You don't have any money. That's the way I created my unit. You don't have money for it. What you're doing is you're pulling from the general fund, begging, robbing, stealing from whatever you can do in order to buy what you need. But the documentation that we're talking about, as far as memos, policies and procedures, team guidelines, SOPs, all those things are going to help you be able to establish what you need for a budget. And if you have that, your city or your county or your state is going to understand better what you're looking to do and be able to fund that in a better way. So another thing that we do, lastly, I would recommend, you don't always have to do this, but it's really helpful for me, is to record your training videos. So when we go out and fly, we record our videos, and some of the stuff we get rid of, other stuff we don't. We record almost every time we deploy our drones, and if we don't use it for evidentiary purposes, we might actually use it as a training value or training aid. So recording is a really good tool for you to learn, to educate, to learn from your mistakes, learn from your successes. And that's something that we really advocate doing. 2 ways to record. Obviously, you can record with your gimbal camera if you just hit the record button. What I like doing, and I prefer doing, is to screen record, because screen recording on the DJI products, if you have a smart controller, will actually record your audio. So it records the talking outside of the remote. It records basically the pilot's voice. And it's super helpful, kind of like if you're listening to a fixed wing manned aircraft and you're listening to the pilot and TFO conversing and planning back and forth as they're in the plane working their mission. I really enjoy listening to that. It's a really cool training aid. So those are the top things that I recommend you guys do as far as your program goals. Now let's talk about some. Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, if you want to go back one just very briefly, just point out as we move along here, there's a lot of things that we're suggesting that folks do or be considering as they build a program. And there are sample policies and procedures and training documents and all kinds of things on the LEDA website. That's a part of our goal, is to make that really easy for you. Writing policies and procedures can be daunting, and almost none of us recreate the wheel. We steal from other places and we adapt it to work for us. And we're continuing to work on building our database to make it easier for folks to get in there and be able to download a few examples and then cut, paste, and add their own needs. So all of these things that we're encouraging you to do, don't feel like we're telling you to go out and just do it on your own. We've got the resources to help get you started there. And then SWAT is Special Weapons and Tactics, the tactical team. SAR is Search and Rescue, for those that may not know the abbreviations.
Yes, thank you for outlining that. I appreciate it. Some hugely important tool in doing what we're doing and creating your team is to basically go off of paths that are paved by other people before you. And a lot of us have put our blood, sweat, and tears into creating programs and have created these things from scratch. Other people, and like Kyle said, we've borrowed from other people as well. So all these resources we want you to be able to have access to, and you can reach out and hit our website, and we'll work through those things to get you those resources. So moving on to some of the hurdles that you guys are going to come up with when you guys are trying to get your UAS program started. And I'll start off with a couple from my aspect, but I know every agency is going to be different, and every geographical area is politically different, is personnel-wise different, culturally different. So you may not even run into any of these issues that we're talking about, but these are some of the issues that we've specifically run into where we came from. So my biggest hurdle in getting our UAS program off the ground was our command staff, and it was what we call like the internal perception, or the internal perception maybe of the public perception, which is kind of like 2 layers of perception there. But command staff was a huge hurdle for us to get through. We had funding, we had money to be able to buy stuff. I mean, we said we didn't, but we did, and it was a long process of trying to convince my command staff, the captain's chief, to be able to say, okay, this is a tool that's not going to go out there and create a lot of public concern. And when you're working in the state of Oregon or in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of, sometimes you feel like there's going to be a lot of political backlash on it, but ironically, that just hasn't happened. The public perception has been absolutely positive. And so I think that internal perception was more of a hurdle than the actual public perception was. So command staff was a big hurdle, but again, I kind of just kept trying to beat the door down and continue going as hard as I could to try to get this program started, and finally that worked out for me. Public perception, though, I mean, it should be considered, absolutely. It's one of the things we can't overlook. If you're in an area like we are, where it might be politically more on the liberal side, more on the maybe even on the anti-police side, you're going to want to figure out how to navigate those waters. But again, like I said, the public perception from our side, at least in the city of Gresham, we neighbor Portland, so we're literally on Portland's border. So all of the crazy stuff that happens in Portland kind of filters into our city as well. We've had nothing but positive feedback, positive reception for our drone program, which has been fantastic. Kyle, do you want to kind of cover a little bit on that on your end?
Yeah, we were in a very similar boat where I was in a unique position to be able to have access to all of our command staff working in policy. Had it been somebody that didn't quite have that access, it would have been much harder. And the biggest issue was people in our department were concerned about what the public would think, how well it would actually go over. The reality was that our public has been absolutely nothing but supportive. I also, as part of the policy worked with our police commission, which is in our department primarily reviews policy and makes recommendations for the chief on police policy. And I had a unique situation of a chief and an interim director at the time who were both kind of helped push our policy into the police commission realm. And that helped with our command staff's perception of what the public might think. And that kind of launches us into the D word, which is drones. I think we're mostly at the point where it doesn't bring a very negative connotation or response to folks when they hear the word drone. It definitely, we were in the throes of that in the time that we were building out our program and 3 years ago when LEDA was coming together. The unique thing was that our police commission has 2 city council members, both fairly liberal. Eugene is fairly liberal. We also are right on the I-5 corridor between San Francisco and Portland. And yet when I presented policy topics, I brought a policy that was the Eugene unmanned aircraft systems policy and one that just said drone team. And our police commission actually felt that drone team was more transparent, because at that point you could buy a DJI Mavic Mini or a Mavic Pro Platinum in Costco, and they saw that, and that's what they perceived a drone to be. And so, much to the shock and surprise of many, our police commission voted and recommended that our policy just be called drone team. And so we might be the only department in the US that actually has drone instead of UAS in their policy document. But that was a unique piece that I wouldn't have anticipated. And don't underestimate the power of just being open with what things are and recognizing that the shift has been made about what drones are and what people perceive that to be. I'm going to let you talk about the S word. I'm going to let you talk about the S word, because that's one that you have more experience with how your program started, John.
Yeah, so the S word I would call surveillance, and a lot of people think that they're going to be using drones. They're just going to be just mindlessly surveilling the public with it 24/7, watching our every move, looking in our windows, watching our young teenage kids sunbathing outside, and it's like that's not what we're using our drones for. And so just kind of avoiding the perception that any of that could be done. And that would be outlined in your guys' policies and procedures. So make sure to include some sort of language in there that says, unless there's a reason for you to be doing what you're doing in the air over a specific property, we shouldn't be like necessarily loitering over or scanning a specific property if we don't have a legitimate reason for doing it. Now, if some people may perceive us being flying over property and saying, oh, they were looking right down in my windows, and they have no way to prove that, and then we can go back and look at our flight logs and say, no, that's actually not what was happening. This is why we were up, and that's why it's important to log, and we'll talk about logging in a minute. So weaponization perceptions, we talk about that. So, there's a lot of joking going around, all over. We talk about it all the time, at least on my department. Everyone jokes around. When are you going to put a gun on that thing? When are you going to put a taser on that thing? When are you going to be able to drop a bomb from that thing? And Oregon basically outlaws any sort of weaponization of drones for law enforcement. The only thing we can really do, I would say, is put some sort of less than lethal device on there. And we can't put anything on there that would cause serious physical injury to a person. So we're basically, at least in my opinion, we're not even going to broach that subject. We're not even going to put tasers or anything like that on there. We don't want to deal with the ramifications of that. Now, I think if we were in a situation that was kind of like if we were in a situation that was unprecedented and we had to make a decision based upon life and death at the time, that's going to be above my pay grade. But at that time, up until now, we're not going to be training, we're not going to be using weapons mounted to our drones. Budgeting issues, those are things that you're going to have to work out if your agency just doesn't have a budget. But here's the thing about drones is that they're a force multiplier for a very small amount of money. So if your agency has a few $1,000s, or if you've got $5,000 to $10,000 that you can spare, then you can potentially go buy a Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced, and that's going to be a massive force multiplier. And then you can start training your crew with that. So with the budget, you're going to have to account for, or you're going to have to put some things into your budget that you didn't account for before, like batteries, maintenance, hard drives, computers, whatever it needs to do. There's going to be more than just the drone itself. So think about those hurdles that you'd have to jump through. Think about all the different peripheral items that you're going to need to buy before you just jump in and buy a drone, and then come at your program with all the information possible. Lastly, go ahead.
Yeah, let me dive into the budget thing. Be creative and think creatively. We also don't have a budget. It's been, we've kind of done the big steal and borrow. But I was led to an internal city grant. It was telecom funds for new technology or technology needs that had been unbudgeted for, so things that came up. And I was able to make a pitch to this general city grant for 2 of our first Mavic Enterprise Zooms. Never would have pictured that being a funding source for us to be able to buy drones, and yet it worked out well. And lots of cities have creative, unique little pots. Go talk to your finance people. They know all of the grants and all of the internal workings, and may be able to come up with a creative place for coming up with some money.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest way that we were able to get our M300 was through traffic replacement funds. They were going to buy another Pharaoh, but we already had 2 of them, and so it's like, we don't need a third Pharaoh. And we've made friends with traffic for such a long time, and they've wanted us to use drones for crash reconstruction for such a long time that it was kind of a no-brainer for them to say, hey, we've got all this money for a Pharaoh machine, why don't we use it for a drone? It'll save us hours of time closing down a road. So that worked out really well for us. So make friends with other teams and units in your department that may, like Kyle said, may have a honeypot somewhere that they could potentially allocate towards a budget for you guys. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I want to talk, I want to be able to hit some Q&A stuff here, but I do want to talk about some of the training and the logging and stuff here. So like I said, documentation is a big deal of what we do. Your UAS program, you guys should be documenting as much as you possibly can. You should have a running training log, a running mission flight. You should have a running flight log, basically, and something that documents all the flights that you do and all the deployments that you have. I keep that separate from my training missions. So I have 2 different Excel spreadsheets. One runs all of our training mission, or one runs all of our missions, all of our deployments in the field that are for specific law enforcement purpose. The other log is for training that we do. When our pilots go out there and just fly the drone for training, I document all those hours as well. It's really important that we document those things so that way we know how much flight time our pilots have. We can document where our pilots are flying. If somebody has a complaint about something, maybe a drone flying in the area, that would be documented. Hey, that's just the police. We're doing training in that area. This is what was happening. We can go back and we can look at even our flight logs within the app to see where a camera was pointed and how high we were, all that kind of stuff. So those are really important to do, and it kind of saves you guys from potential, some potential pitfalls of having a drone program. Keep track of training hours. I think it's really important to train your team as much as you possibly can, and then track those training hours. I write a training memo when I do training. Some agencies don't, but what I do with our agency is that our Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, which is our central certification agency within the state of Oregon, I send all of my training memos down to DPSST, and all of my pilots get training credit every time we do a training day. And it's helpful. It means that the training is on the books, and it shows on their training record that they've done training that day. I think it's important to do. And let's see what else we got. Oh, annual reports. I'll talk about that real quick. So at the end of the year last year, I had an idea. Let me kind of encapsulate everything that we've done as a UAS team in a large report that has nice pictures and paragraphs and explanations and charts and numbers and stuff. So that way our command staff can see, what did we do with drones last year in the year of 2020? How many times did we deploy? How many times was it effective? And then they can also see some cool pictures and whiz bang, sparkly items. And everybody knows we as cops, we like shiny things. So looking at a bunch of pictures with a bunch of guys flying drones is really cool. But encapsulating that into an annual report, I think, is a really important thing for us to do to be able to justify our existence. And so that's what I plan on doing every year from here on out, is to document our team's activities in an annual report and basically just summarize the stuff. And there's actually an example of an annual report that I wrote on our LEDA website for you guys to look at. And that's if the public even wanted to know, we can release that publicly. It's sanitized for public consumption as well, is what I'd say. Kyle, you have anything to add on those things?
Yeah, the training log piece is you do a little bit different than we do. I keep a very short, down and dirty deployment log that has the date, the location, a very, very brief 3 or 4 words about what the deployment was and who was there, so that we have an idea of which of our pilots are flying, what day, when, and we have a total that we can easily pull a number out of how many actual field deployments we've had. For our actual flight logging, we use a third-party software, Air Data. There's a number of options out there that all do a really good job. The unique part about our Air Data is that our city created a citywide policy and procedure for drone use. And again, that creative budgeting, our risk services division are the ones that actually wanted to have a centralized log or database, so that if the public had a concern about a drone, we could log in and be able to say, nope, it wasn't a city drone, or yes, it was. And so our risk services pays for our Air Data account, and that's been a phenomenal way for being able to log and track total flight hours. In the few times that we've had some issues, either with the mechanically or with a pilot having a bonehead move and flying into something, the Air Data logs a significant amount of stuff that's easy to be able to pull up and look at. I can look at it from my computer on any of my pilots' flights and be able to see what happened. It's been incredibly helpful, and absolutely keeping track of those flight hours and training topics and whatnot, and being able to say where you guys are at, who's getting the flight hours each month, and keeping track to make sure everybody's staying current.
Excellent. So we recommend you guys train as a team. If you have a team, that's fantastic. What that does is it builds camaraderie amongst the team, and it kind of allows you guys to be able to figure out what works best and what doesn't as a team. If you don't have a team per se, we recommend you reaching out to other agencies that are near you guys, other agencies that are in the area that are doing UAS stuff as well. And we can also help you guys connect those agencies. So if you have a question, say, hey, I'm in this city, do you guys know of any other agency that is doing drone stuff near me? Then we would look at our list of folks that are involved in what we're doing, and we'd say, hey, this agency's doing it. We reach out to them, see if they're good with contacting you guys, and then kind of do the virtual handshake and like a warm intro, so that way you guys can then get together and potentially train together. And then potentially, you guys can set up you guys' own MOU. Like, let's say you got neighboring agencies and you didn't even know that you guys were operating drones together. Well, you guys might want to form a collaborative team together. We're going to form with Gresham. We're working on forming a collaborative team with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, because they're wanting to get a drone program started. And it's like, well, hey, don't reinvent the wheel. Why don't you guys just jump on board with us? We'll create an East County UAS team, like we have an East County SWAT team, an East County CNT, crisis negotiator team, vehicle crimes team, and we'll create a drone team. So look at your resources, look outside the box for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're in that same boat where we've been inviting our county and a neighboring city to all of our training days, and they've been coming pretty regularly. And that neighboring city is really pretty seriously diving into starting a program. And we had a very serious talk a couple of weeks ago about just formulating a metro team and combining our forces into one, seeing the benefit, and yet the amount of work. If we can combine resources and equipment, then we can just be that much more effective, that much faster. They can have access to a much more significant, robust team earlier and quicker. And so maximizing our budget dollars and our resources is a great idea.
Absolutely. So we'll kind of blow through the training day quickly, but basically how we usually run it, and we run it this way in LEDA as well as at my agency, but we do kind of a morning classroom portion where we talk about a new tactic or a new skill. Usually we do like a team update. We talk about what's going on with the team, any past deployments that we want to debrief. Then we move out into practicing those kinds of skills or tactics. And usually we'll kind of split it up like a sports practice where you have different stations that you go to keep everyone busy. Because, if you've been a cop for any certain amount of time, at a moderately sized agency, you know that sometimes training days can drag on and a lot of people are sitting around just jaw jacking the whole time. So in order to avoid that, we break it up into stations, and that keeps people moving and keeps people active. I got kind of a quick down and dirty, what a memo might look like. And again, there's more of these on our website under our member resources tab. But writing out your, kind of your training plan is an important way to document that specific training. So we talked about justifying your existence, talked about memos, annual reports. And I, as a team supervisor, I do my best. Sometimes I get busy and get carried away with sergeanting work and stuff, but the idea for me and what I like to do is try to update my team on a regular basis. If I can send a weekly email out to the guys on my team, I'm just say, hey, this is what happened this week. This is how many deployments we got. This is some news. Maybe this is an equipment issue that we're having. Keep an eye out for this. Just, short and sweet. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're pretty short. But I like to update the team so everyone's in the know about everything.
Our team, for each deployment each day, as an officer flies a mission, at the end of the day, we require each of the pilots to write up a drone brief, and it gets emailed to our team, which includes me, all the team members, and our lieutenant. And just a very brief description of what they did, what they flew, how many flights it was. And that allows us to have an idea of the day-to-day activities of what's going on, and our lieutenant to see what folks are doing, what worked, what didn't, et cetera, and any info to share about that mission. And that has proven to be a really simple and yet useful tool for everybody staying on the same page and actively engaged, even though we're spread across the 7 days of the week and days and nights with our team.
Yeah, and I think that there's nothing that's more important on the job outside of obviously standardized training, but incident debriefs are one of the most important functions of what we do in training. So like Kyle said, if you guys are debriefing your team after all these deployments, and your team can see how that deployment worked out, or you can go back and review that footage and say, hey, this worked, this didn't. Hey, let's change the way we work on this because we found out it doesn't work that way. Those are vitally important to getting your program on a really good standing footing. So I put up on the screen just a couple of ideas that we have. On the left side, you'll see the cover sheet of an annual report from last year. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see a checklist, and checklists are super important. Checklists are really important for what we do. They're really important in aviation, but they're also really important for UAS stuff. And the reason being is that we have a lot of moving parts on our drones. We've got a lot of functionality that can maybe not function properly. And if you have a checklist, you can potentially mitigate a lot of those issues. One of the things we have, this is called the Delta Tahoe checklist. We call our unit, our drone call sign is Delta 1. So we have a specifically designated Chevy Tahoe, Patrol Tahoe, that has the drone built out in the back with a screen and all the battery chargers, inverter, all that stuff. So this is the checklist that my guys go through every day when they go on shift, and they go through this checklist. They check they turn the ignition on, they check the inverter, make sure it's good to go. They power on and off the monitor, the hotspots, making sure that it's above 90%. We've got a Mavic battery charger. We've got a Matrice battery bank. We do the pre-flight check on the 300. We do the pre-flight check on the M2E. We do a pre-flight on the Mavic Mini that we have. We check our comms, make sure we're set up on the right net, or the right radio frequency, so we don't, throw our headset on, because we have a different radio headset for when we're operating the drones. We don't throw that on, turn on the channel, and we're on some TAC channel. That would be terrible. So we make sure everything's set up exactly the way we need it before we fly, so that way once we get up in the air, we don't have to worry about that stuff. And then we look at the accessories, like what accessories do we need? We've got our HDMI cable, we've got a smart controller charger, we've got a hotspot charger, we've got extra props, we've got our light and everything. So having checklists is really important. Within that, you can even go deeper in the weeds, which I still recommend doing, is to have a checklist, because if you have a GL60 light, you understand that it is not the easiest thing to get powered on and synced with your drone. So have a GL60 checklist, make that a functionality of what you guys do, and we're working on that too. We're working on that right now. Okay. Move on to, basically this in essence says regularly assess what your team is doing to see if what you're doing is successful, if you need more training in a certain area, if you can kind of maybe move away from training in an area because you guys are solid and come back to it later, but just constantly be assessing how things are going. look and see if you need any new equipment and work on obtaining that new equipment. Waivers are a big thing too. Have an alarm set, or have something set. If you have an FAA waiver, or whatever country you're in, if you need to have some sort of waiver to fly drones in there, have an alarm set well before the date that expires, so you can work on renewing that waiver. All right, Kyle, tell these guys why they should join us and what we're doing.
Well, we've already talked about most of it, but
Yeah.
We're helping to create standardized level of training and best practices. We will be at the point here in the near future for publishing a recommended NIST basic maneuvering orbiting time for what your pilots should be able to do to be at a basic level of drone proficiency. We train quarterly in person and or online, and we're continuing to roll out more online presence even as we get back to, hopefully continue to get back to indoor or in-person training. Hopefully being able to publish in a webinar or post video setup the classroom portions of those trainings. Our annual conference in Bend, Oregon, which is coming up here in about 6 weeks, and it's coming together with phenomenal training. We're gonna have about 12 outdoor and indoor flying stations for folks. There's gonna be lots of hands-on experience time, along with really good classroom presentations from the FAA, FBI, our LEDA board members on all kinds of things. So we'll actually should have a full copy of the agenda up on the website here soon, and those spots are very limited. We're keeping that conference relatively small overall in order to make sure that we have good hands-on, good classroom, lots of time for Q&A, and for folks to interact with us and the instructors and the vendors that are there. We are certainly here anytime any of our members need help working through a problem or getting their program started. You can very easily reach out, get a phone call with any of our board members. We'll connect you with someone who can help talk you through what it is that you're working through. We're continuing to compile more incident debriefs so we can all learn from each other, and adding more robust incident debriefs into our normal training. We certainly can talk about how to do things and what to do and what not to do, but we really learn so much more. We can actually see things that went right, things that went wrong, and hear those lessons learned. And so the incident debriefs are a big part as we continue to have more and more incidents where it's helpful. And then, of course, it's super cheap, $49 a year for a single membership, or $400 for up to 10 pilots at your agency. We are here doing this because we're passionate about what we're doing and drone stuff, and want to make sure that it's accessible to folks while also bringing enough money to support the back end of what it requires for us to be able to put this on.
Yeah, and it's like we talked about earlier, we're all cops full time, and we do this right now out of the abundance of passion for drones in our field. So this money goes to helping us be able to fund us for training, even fund you guys to potentially come out and do training with us. Our conference right now is full, but I just bumped up the number to allow an additional 10 people. Just in case you guys see this, you do some research and you want to come out to Bend, Oregon and train with us in October. So if you guys have any questions about that, it's $200 per person to go. It's super cheap. We kept it really cheap because we want people to be able to go do it. So the biggest cost for you guys would potentially be travel. And but $200 gets you 4 days at our annual conference. You're gonna have great vendors. DJI, I think Grant is coming. Wayne is gonna come out as well. And you're gonna meet the folks from DJI, and we've got other great vendors that are gonna be there. And just a really, really good group of folks out there that are really passionate about what we're doing. And I'm super excited about putting that on. So again, if you guys have any questions about anything, one of the other things I want to mention is, like I said before, that this is for law enforcement only. So if you are a sworn or former law enforcement officer, we do vet our members. So if you do request to become a member with us, we will reach out to you. And it's the best way for you guys to get this vetting process done quickly is to use your agency email. So that way we can kind of vet that email and verify a couple of things before we kind of allow you guys to see some of the law enforcement sensitive stuff we have on our website there. So.
And that is not just US. You're absolutely welcome, and we would invite anyone that are police drone programs from around the world that want to have a membership to join up and help contribute. In fact, we'd love to speak with you and maybe have a meeting with you to talk about how things are going in your country with your programs and what kind of challenges you're facing, and help us to learn more about more than just what's happening here in Oregon, Washington, and the U.S., but even further abroad than that.
Yeah, sorry we went a little bit long, but I would love, we had a lot to tell you guys, so I'm gonna hand it back over to Grant. You've been monitoring the chats or any questions or anything?
Yeah, well, we're running a little long here, so I did send kind of some information in the chat there if you guys do need to hop off post-webinar survey, if you'd like to give us some feedback, the LEDA website, where you can get more information on them, and then a link to join our next webinar on the fire and thermal side, if that's more up your alley there. But a few questions we did want to cover was one, kind of talking about the use of drones and I guess the need to land them. You obviously can't have them up a single drone 24/7. So could you touch on any procedures you use needing to land the drone, swap out the batteries, or have limited, deployable time with the drones?
Yeah, so what we do is we train to do a leapfrog, basically is what we call it. And so if we've got a drone that's overhead with a point of surveillance on a specific incident, before we bring that drone back, we have a contingency for saying, hey, our battery's at 40% right now. We should be prepping the next drone to go up to be able to take over that point of surveillance. So we deconflict our airspace. We will get another drone up and running that usually will have the same capability as that first one. And then we'll put that drone up there at a specific altitude, and deconflicting, maybe we'll have 75 to 100 feet difference between altitudes for those two drones, and as they're launched from the same spot, we'll get overhead, and at that point we'll communicate and say, okay, this other drone can come back and swap batteries. But trying to do our best not to lose the eye is the whole goal. Leapfrogging in our experience has been the way to avoid that. Kyle?
Yeah, we're the same way, and what we've found is that for major incidents, more significant protracted incidents, we really try to have at least 3 pilots available for that call. 4 is really preferred when you work on leapfrogging and somebody doing management on battery management, plugins, chargers, just keeping the infrastructure working, or live streaming, making sure that that's working properly. 3 to 4. When we're on patrol, we get what we get, and so it's usually 1 pilot on at a time, and there's just going to be a break as they have to do battery swaps and kind of juggle all of that on their own. But really, the call out time is fairly significant for us, and so there really are 2 different things. The in the moment active calls, that we just get what we get, and there is some downtime for major incidents. Really 3 at a minimum, and I'll take everybody if I can get them, if we've got a major SWAT thing where we're doing overwatch and interior flying and other things.
No, great feedback there. One question kind of after the incident debrief was, do you guys have any processes in place where you do geolocating with the information from the drone or the laser rangefinder to the ground teams at all?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The laser rangefinder is a really useful tool for 2 reasons. Search and rescue is a fantastic opportunity for that, because that laser rangefinder actually tells you what the GPS location is of the end point of that laser. So if you've got your red target on what you want somebody to, you can point that crosshair right at that subject, and that GPS location will show up there, and you can actually change the format of that GPS location too, because I know a lot of search and rescue teams, they use, like, I think it's UTM or something like that type of, I don't know what they use, but it's some sort of weird acronym of what they use for their GPS stuff. I'm not familiar with it, but they can also take your decimal GPS locations and they can translate that to whatever they want. So that's a really useful tool for that. The other thing that it can be useful as well as is estimating distances. So let's say if you want to estimate how far something away is from your search team, you can take your laser and hit your search team with it, and then you can move it up to where your subject is and kind of give it some sort of rough estimate there. It's not going to be science, but at the same time, it gives them an estimate. The other way to kind of do that we train on is, once you give an estimate and say, hey, your subject is 100 yards out, then once they've crossed about half that distance, tell that team, okay, you've crossed about half the distance. That way they know if it was 50 feet, not 100 yards, they know, okay, well, I've got another 25 feet to go, roughly. And that's kind of a good way for you to mitigate that. But that's the way that technology and geolocating stuff is really helpful. The other geolocating thing I really want to touch on is the pin drop. And the pin drop is really, really useful for 2 reasons. One of them is if you want to put the drone up at an address and you're going to a call, put the pin on that address before you launch your drone, and then you could either hit the blue button on your top left screen if you have the Matrice 300, and it will divert your camera directly to that specific location, and then you just fly there. It will also overlay, and you'll have the augmented reality overlay on your pilot screen on your FPV camera. And then you can orient the nose of your drone to that diamond and just fly to that diamond. So the geolocating is super helpful for that. The other thing it's really helpful for is when you're doing the battery swaps, hot swap with the M300, you can drop your pin where you're looking, and then come back, do your hot swap and launch again, and your pin's already set, so you don't have to relocate what you were looking for originally back then. So super helpful tools that you have with the Matrice 300 and the geolocating stuff.
Nice. And I guess one small note from our side, coming soon, we'll have more pins. Right now, you're limited to one green pin with your M300 and H20. We're adding more pin colors, custom labels, and some more items there. So glad to hear that's been useful in the field, and hopefully we can improve the use there. A follow-up question on the leapfrogging was on the video streaming. Are you guys streaming from multiple drones? Do you switch the stream over? Or how is that working in that regard if you're doing the leapfrog and live streaming the incident?
Al, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So, and we did a bunch of this. We provided Overwatch to our protests last year for about 40 days straight in Eugene. And that's where we really launched into live video streaming. We use a streaming service called ResponderCast from Responder Air, and it is not as specific to the drone streaming service. And so within their program, it screen mirrors or streams the video screen as it is. And so it's not specific to the drone. So one drone can start the feed and another drone, and then stop it once they're done, and then the other drone can pick it up. And so our pilots work side by side as they're doing their Overwatch leapfrogging, and they'll coordinate with each other. Okay, I'm dropping the feed. Okay, I'm picking up the feed. And then we get on the air and tell the commanders, okay, the feed's swapped. Sometimes it'll pop right up. Sometimes they have to hit the refresh on their screen. And the live streaming, ResponderCast is pretty affordable compared to what else is out there, even though there are a lot of options that'll get you there. AirData, DroneSense all have streaming options. But it's another major way to get your agencies to support your program. Once the captains and the chief can be watching what's happening on the ground, they will not want to go away from not having it. And that's exactly how our program expanded greatly last year. We had bad weather. Our drones has started getting grounded. They were unable to have the eye, and magically we found enough money to come up with a waterproof M300 just so we could fly in the rain. That was the catalyst for us getting an M300. And so if you're able to squeeze that streaming out and be able to show them, give them eyes on, it will absolutely be a game changer for that command adoption and support of the program.
Nice. Good info there. Have you all used a tether, and did you find it effective in that use, or feedback from departments that are part of LEDA?
I haven't used a tether. I don't know of any other agencies, especially in law enforcement, that are using a tether. I could see a tether being something that might be usable maybe in a fire situation, or like some sort of large scale event where you just want something hovering. But for our purposes, we're moving the drone around a lot, and I think a tether would really inhibit what we're trying to do. So yeah, we haven't seen a use case for tethers in law enforcement.
Yeah, I agree, John. I've thought about it a lot because it seems like it could be really helpful. I think it's just too limiting for what we do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Responder Air, ResponderCast is the actual product that my department uses for streaming.
Cool. And then looks like our final question here was just in regards to if you have the Excel sheets or any documentation on after deployment items on the LEDA site.
Yeah, we do. We have both. I've got my Gresham flight log example on there as an Excel spreadsheet. And then I also have, my pilots fill out what we call a UAS, or Unmanned Aircraft System DAR, a daily activity report. And every time they deploy a drone, they fill this DAR out that outlines what they did, where they flew, and just a quick little blurb about what happened. So I have an example of that on the website as well. We have some other after action reports on there as well. We've got one from Oregon State Police, and I think one from Benton County as well. But we're continuing to furnish the website with lots of resources. So if you guys have specific resources that you want to share or that you think would be applicable to what we're doing, share that with us. Or you can even get on there and post it. You know, our website allows users, our members, to be able to post stuff up there. So if you want to upload a file on there into a certain folder or whatever, upload that file on there, and then we would be greatly appreciated.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. I know there are some great nuggets that I learned from John and Kyle today. So I hope you all had the same experience. I hope to see you at one of our future public safety webinars or in person at the LEDA conference coming up. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thanks again to John and Kyle.
Thanks for having us, Grant. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.